Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in our international gathering. I can cover it by saying, as they do down under, good day. Welcome to our workshop. I'm very pleased always to do these Saturday workshops, especially where they're co-facilitated. So that I believe it puts a lot of more depth and breadth into the subject matter. Fred Luskin will be what I call a co-facilitator today. I'll do an independent talk, a little discussion, presentation on forgiveness to kind of like set the context from my viewpoint and perhaps from most of your viewpoints if you're in a 12-step program. Some of you are not. Some of you are coming specifically to see Fred Luskin, hear Fred Luskin talk about the forgiveness process. In a way, it's a continuation of the workshops that we've done before. I believe we've done at least 2 together. Those are recorded and on my YouTube channel. You can go to the playlists. I'm not exactly sure where they are, but I've got a person who has organized it really well, and you'll be able to find it relatively easy, and perhaps somebody could even indicate that in the chat room. My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic, and that's my email contact if you care to, for whatever reason. It's not going to be very effective for you to call me if you know my numbers. I'm happy to give you those numbers. But the best way to make contact is to email me and set up a specific day and time, especially with the time zone changes, etc. My website address is there, and there's a plethora, again, that word, of resources. It's like a library, and they're all downloadable. They're all free, as are my YouTube recordings and the entire playlist library, as I mentioned. A variety of subjects, including the 2 prior workshops with Fred Luskin on forgiveness. Forgiveness is a process. That's really the key to it. And I first met Fred, probably 30 plus years ago, actually. We were both asked by a group to do a presentation on forgiveness. Fred from the scientific secular standpoint. Fred is a clinical psychologist, a professor at Stanford University, and he did his doctoral dissertation on forgiveness 30, 35 years ago, probably. And then he converted it to a book so that we who don't have that kind of exposure, education, and training could read it and learn from it a very practical application of psychological components to be brought to this forgiveness. I looked the word up back in the day when I was beginning to understand it, want to understand it, and experience it. And forgiveness, in my dictionary, it said a decision to release. A decision to release. What we discovered, each of us separately presenting, but then having a combined Q&A on the stage, is that although our vocabulary is different, our approach is different. He calls it a secular. He means scientific, human development, psychology. As a scientist himself, he literally cannot use immaterial vocabulary and or references. And I came to him and I said, you know, the process that you've outlined both here today and in your book is the same process I experienced, but the words are different. And he said, yes, because it really is about human development. The process is the same, the words are different. And in all humility, and you'll see that today, I'm assuming, when he speaks, a wonderful sense of earthiness and informality He said, you guys in the spiritual world, you guys in the 12-step world have a real advantage. And I said, what's that? He said, you've got God, you've got higher power, and it's a very powerful X plus. I thought that began our relationship right there. It's a process that many of us have read about and experimented with, either in our religious tradition and or in our human development and in our 12-step program or some other form. But you've heard me quote Einstein before, if you've been around me at all. The consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. It's a brilliant wisdom saying. And what it means is my mind is the source of my problem. Mind in the broadest of senses. And I can't fix my mind with a broken mind, because whatever comes out of a distorted mind will in fact be distorted. It's kind of the catch-22 conundrum. The man who first took me through the work, and if you look up at your picture, he said, Herb, you have a lot of information, but you have very little transformation. I mean, that really got my attention. And he invited me to pray a prayer for an open mind and an open heart. Think about just having a positive attitude and a willingness to have an open mind and heart, perhaps even today as a gift, whether or not you're spiritual, whether or not you believe in God or higher power or anything along that, quote, traditional spiritual vocabulary, it doesn't make any difference. Perhaps we could use the words from the big book itself, a very universal vocabulary, a very all-inclusive vocabulary, because the heart of steps 2 and 3 about higher power God as we don't understand it, the very heart of it is you choose, you choose, you choose. Check it out, page 53. God is or God isn't, what is your choice? Step 3, made a decision to turn. The real key, I do believe this, and I'll repeat it when, if Fred isn't here and he hasn't heard it, the real key to forgiveness is choice. When I looked it up, it said a decision to release them. And paradoxically, my experience is when I made a decision to release them and took the actions to release them, we'll talk about that in a minute, I was released. Well, that's ancient wisdom codified in the Lord's Prayer, what we call the Lord's Prayer. In the Christian scripture, it indicates that Jesus created this prayer, the Our Father. It's not a Christian prayer, although it's become that. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus wasn't a Christian. But be that as it may, and I don't want to get into any religious controversy. I'm merely doing the historical literary look. And it says, to the extent that we release them from their debt, we are released. I think that's the original vocabulary. And then more recently, in the 18th, 19th century, there was a prayer written alleged to St. Francis. Of course, St. Francis was in the 12th century. So obviously, St. Francis didn't write a prayer that emerged in the 18th, 19th century. But the prayer has the dynamic. To the extent that we forgive others, we are forgiven. So it's ancient wisdom, probably in the Buddhist literature, in the Hindu literature, in the Jewish literature. I'm not that literate to know all of that. So invite whatever it is, a power other than yourself, or the, as Dr. Berger, one of my other co-facilitator friends, mentions, allowing the best in me to manage the worst in me, the higher self, the true self, in contrast to the lower self and the false self. The point here is a decision to have an open mind right now, to be taken to a place from an information standpoint, and certainly from an experience standpoint, that you don't even know exists. That is absolutely my experience. Please join me. Spirit of the universe, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, my path to freedom, and the process of forgiveness, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, my path to freedom, and especially the process of forgiveness. The target and purpose of this word forgiveness and the path that delivers us is freedom. Freedom from this negative tension that we have in relationship to life or relationship to others, or especially in relationship to ourselves. Turning from the darkness to the light. Embracing reality as it is. That's probably the key phrase here that needs to be, I said embraced. So why are you here? What is your current suffering? We've got a very wonderfully large community that has joined us today. Who does that? Who takes a Saturday morning or afternoon or wherever you are and spends a couple hours reviewing the dynamics of their thoughts and their feelings and their attitudes and especially their behavior in relationship to the hurt and the betrayal and the infidelity and the brutality, sometimes criminal, of our background. I mean, it's true. It's true. It all happened. But it's equally true, we can't change it. We cannot change our history. But we suffer because of it. What is your current suffering? What is your current suffering? What is the source of your suffering? A very different question. The current suffering might just be the smoke, whereas we really need to identify the fire. Where is it coming from? My experience with the 12-step process, which is all I can talk about because that's my experience, revealed to me that fire, that unconscious, mostly unconscious source of my suffering. What about forgiveness? What are you holding today that you haven't been able to release? In terms of your experience with life, with your family of origin, father or mother, partner or ex-partner, siblings or children, institutions, religious institutions, work institutions, public, political institutions. Goodness, so many sources of suffering. A decision to release. Look at my hand. A decision to release. Now, it's not a light switch event. It's a process, like a dimmer switch. I've said that about the steps. I've said that about transformation. I've said that about awakening. And I say that about freedom. It's not like I get a thought and I get some information and then I have the transformation. That's not how it works for me. A decision to release. Now, you may resist this with everything conscious and unconscious in you right now. Hell no. Okay. I heard a definition the other day that just was wonderful in its simplicity. The proper use of my free will. That's what defines us as human beings. that we have freedom, that we have free will, that we can make a choice. We can get up or not get up. We can turn right or not turn right. We have a series of decisions that we make all day, some of them conscious, some of them unconscious. But that's the center post of being human, free will. And yet the whole basis of the 12-step program is we don't have free will in a couple respects. I don't have free will over my addiction. I'm powerless. No choice. I don't have free will over my managing my life. I don't have a choice. That I will be biologically condemned by my addiction, and I will be psychologically condemned by my self-will. On my own power. That's the theory and really the practice of the 12-step process. I am in bondage of addiction until I'm not. I can be given freedom from that by a process called the 12 steps. Those of you who are in the 12-step program and have applied the 12 steps. Many people say the 12 steps didn't work for me. My suspicion is they didn't work the 12 steps. The experience I have is the experience that's illustrated on page 84 of the big book. After the 9th step, it says we are placed in a position of neutrality, but hear the grace of that. I am placed in a position of neutrality. After the 9th step, which means I had the willingness to take the action to complete the 9th step, and I was delivered to freedom from my addiction. But it also says right there that we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. A daily reprieve not from our addiction, a daily reprieve from our unmanageability. That selfishness, self-centeredness in the unhealthy sense. Structurally, it's the way we're built. It's a survival instinct based on fight, flight, and freeze. But if we have gone through some form of rite of passage, for instance, the steps, or a good religious tradition, or a good solid relationship, or a good authentic therapeutic process, in some fashion, we've transitioned from the child to the adult, the rite of passage, from the perceptions of and attitudes of and behaviors of a child to those of an adult. Freedom. This is what bondage looks like. Pathetic Herbie, seeing no way out, not knowing that he didn't know, not seeing that he doesn't see, but just miserable in my addiction, but also in my unmanageability, restless, irritable, and discontent 4 years sober, not knowing that. Do I want a sense of well-being? Do I want a sense of freedom? Again, the one word that I think captures the essence of this process that would be the motivator, forgiveness process, is freedom. Freedom from that tension, freedom from that negativity, freedom from that feeling of resentment and anger, or sometimes just fear and shame and guilt. There's a choice that we need to make right at the beginning of the 12-step process. That's my frame of reference. You all know that. It's almost the only thing I can really talk about in terms of the process and the frame of reference. I add spirituality to it. I add psychology to it. I add human development to it to the extent that I'm aware of it and have experienced it. But underneath, my entire experience is about finding power through the 12-step process. You know, most of you, that I studied to be a Catholic priest in a monastery for 7 years. I was silent for 7 years. And as a nun in the audience said one day, she yelled out, and he hasn't stopped talking since. It was a great line. But this is a choice about power. What is your choice? Step 2, your choice. There's no right or wrong answer. There's just your answer. God, as we don't understand it, that God word that gets a lot of bad banter, unhealthy conversation, it's just a word. God is the symbol to represent the reality that cannot be represented by human words. I hope you heard that. No word, no phrase is adequate. If this reality exists, it's beyond our understanding and comprehension. I love the word embrace. I can't understand it, but I can embrace it. I can lean into it. And I have no idea whether it's true or not, all of my concepts, all of my vocabulary, but I act as if it is, and something happens. What brings this acorn to that 100-year-old oak tree, all gnarly from living its life in the weather? What is the life force of that? That's what we're talking about. Our inability to capture it in the same way that we cannot capture in our hands air. The word spirit comes from the Greek word spiros, S-P-I-R-O-S, which means breath. It's a fabulous word to capture that which cannot be captured by human understanding or human words. And then we make a decision for a relationship with that. I use the word alignment with reality. My decision to turn, to have a relationship, to be in alignment. When I'm in alignment, my life flows. When I'm out of alignment, I'm going against universal principles, the principles of physics, the principles of psychology. There are universal principles: fidelity, honesty, integrity, simplicity, humility, helpfulness. These are universal principles. When I go against them, they crush me. And when I turn to be in relationship with them, my life flourishes. And that's the word I use for my life for the last 33 years. A relationship with power, an alignment with reality. That phrase probably is a wonderful phrase that will help you get into an experience of forgiveness, to be in alignment with reality, not my story about reality, not my thoughts about reality, not my feelings about reality, not my expectations about reality. These are the obstacles that we address in step 4. My story. Notice it's in quotes. My story was a fairy tale. Now, I didn't know it was a fairy tale. I had lots of information. At age 48, when I'm doing this work over 30 years ago of the step process, I have a graduate education in philosophy. I have a graduate education in psychology. I have a graduate education in theology. And I'm 4 years sober. And I don't know that my story is fictitious until I unpack it. You see, in the beginning, we're born, of course, that Russian doll. You see it in the gift shops. I learned in one of my workshops from a Russian lady there. She said it's Matrushka, the Russian doll, with the image in progressively smaller or larger, depending on which direction you're going in, inside one another. But it's so great a metaphor for how we're built. We're born and we have some genetics that determines our existence, our genetics. My dad was bald. His dad was bald. His dad was bald. And each of them an alcoholic. Predetermined by biology, my genetics. Not my fault, but my responsibility, the reality. I was raised in a particular culture, English and Scottish, that determined my outlook on life in a lot of senses at the cellular level. The emotional experiences or lack thereof, going into a monastery at age 17 and staying there silent to age 24, there was very little human development. In fact, it was consciously suppressed, actually. It was an achievement not to have feelings, especially in a male environment of monks. And then the education that you receive, wherever that is. That's your story. You look the same in every piece of it, except that underneath, there's lots of mischief. Well, be kind. There's lots of mischief with each of those experiences. So the process is, in fact, to deflate that story, to blow up that story, to deconstruct that story, ego deflation at death, to see what the truth is. It took me 3 journeys through the steps over a 10-year period to have the full truth, I do believe, revealed. And in addition to that, some therapy that supported it. But I was brought to freedom. I have been free since 1988, when I did this work the first time, and got freer over time the next 10 years as I did this work 3 different times with 3 different people, having intermittent therapy in between all of that, and some other self-development, human development programs. And we unpack all of the story to awaken to the truth, the real meaning of who I am. One of my teachers calls it the core of goodness. At the heart of the heart of the heart, the underneath human spirit, that core of goodness. What a great image that is. That's where I come from. Some people talk about the spark of the divine. The Hebrew scripture in Genesis talks about that human beings are made in the image and likeness of God. One of my teachers says, and we return the favor by making God in our image and likeness, with tongue in cheek and a little sparkle in his eye. It's very human nature. God as we don't understand it, and we try to use words that are human, and unfortunately then we ascribe human attributes to this immaterial reality. Just basic survival instincts at the biological level: fight, flight, and freeze. This is how we're built. That brainstem, that first brain that was developed millions of years ago, for survival, fight, flight, and freeze, creates an emotion of anger, fight, an emotion of fear, flight, an emotion of dishonesty, freeze, camouflage, hiding, a chameleon. If I'm in a green environment, this happens to be my particular primary survival instinct. If I'm in a green environment, I'll turn green. If I'm in a red environment, I'll turn red, so that I fit in, so that I'm accepted, so that I don't stand out in the sense of being hurt. And that anger, if held, turns into resentment, and that fear, if held, turns into anxiety, and that dishonesty is the shame that we all talk about in the unhealthy sense. Of course, there's healthy shame and there's healthy guilt. Guilt being the negative feeling I have about my behavior, shame being the negative feeling I have about my very being. There's healthy shame and healthy guilt. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about unhealthy shame and unhealthy guilt. But they're survival instincts. And to the extent that we hold on to those emotions, our life disintegrates and our life becomes very small. and we suffer a lot. The big book suggests that the root cause of that is selfishness and self-centeredness. This is all leading us to this awareness of forgiveness, the release of, and the being released from these negative emotions. Steps 4 through 9 are naming and removing them. I'm not going through the entire process, but there are 2 particular steps that led me to understand and to experience the release that I talked about in terms of forgiveness, to be in alignment with life, to be in alignment with the flow of reality. We don't see reality as it is, we see reality as we are. And quite frankly, we need a new pair of glasses. That's a phrase that was given to us by Chuck C. in the book that was captured, a retreat that he did for men in the late 60s. A new pair of glasses. I have glasses. I look through lenses at reality. If the glasses are distorted, my reality will be distorted, but I won't know it's distorted because I'm looking through distorted lenses. It's the only thing I can see. This work, whether it's therapeutic work or spiritual work or 12-step work, is very sophisticated. We're looking at the lenses through which we're looking. Tricky stuff. Not easy. It requires work, looking at the lenses through which I look to evaluate whether they need to be discarded and new glasses and or just refined and reground so that we can see reality more objectively. And even then, we see reality as we are, not as reality is. We will never see reality is because we're always looking through it from the filter of our lenses. Wow, that's huge. I didn't know that I didn't know. Until I did the column 3 of the resentment inventory and I identified my beliefs. Fred Luskin talks about unenforceable rules. I did not know that I had beliefs that were distorted about who I am, about who others are, and about life itself. Many of you have gone through my worksheets on that. They're a little complicated and they're very sophisticated, but they're profoundly effective. And I don't know the truth of this. I'm not a scientist, but my sense is they penetrate the unconscious. I'm able to surface the beliefs that I have, my expectations, my story that I have about myself and others and life itself. And I'm able to look at it and say, is it true? Byron Katie has a wonderful process. Loving What is the name of her book. She comes at it from a completely different perspective. I'm not selling it. I'm just saying it was a wonderful confirmation and clarification of the work I do here, as is Fred Luskin's. He has the book Forgive for Good. We'll mention that many times, Forgive for Good. As many of you have heard me say, the big book is the best book I've ever read because it's so effective. The second book I've ever read, and I've read a few books, the second best book I've ever read is Fred Luskin's book because it's very practical, it's very doable, and it's very effective. I'm a practical guy. I love thoughts and I love feelings and I love poetry and I love mysticism. But I really like things that change the way my feet move so that practically I can become a better person because I'm learning how to behave like a better person. This process in the 12 steps has a really hidden kind of a misunderstood area between column 3 and column 4 in the resentment inventory. If you want to take a note, look at pages 66 and 67 in the big book. And it talks about the removal of these deep resentments. Not all of the resentments are deep. Of the multitude of resentments I had 8 deep. Mother, father, wife, 4 bosses, and a coach from high school. They were really deep. I had worked on them in therapy and self-help and human development programs and some religious sort of efforts, and even with the steps. And they had not been removed. I didn't know they could be removed. I just knew that I needed to understand them and accept them. That was my frame of reference. Until I found that material on page 66, which says we're as powerless over our deep resentments as we are over alcohol. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the essence of it. I'm as powerless over my deep resentments as I am over alcohol, having no power at all. So he suggests we pray. Now, many of you have heard the spiritual direction. Pray for the people that you resent. Great direction. It's really good. It's very healthy. It's a solid spiritual practice. Pray for their healing. It's just not what the big book says on page 67. You have to read it carefully. But what it does say is, you're not praying for them, you're praying for yourself. You're praying for the removal of the cancer, of the deep resentment in yourself. With an open mind and an open heart, that there is a power within me or available to me that will remove in a surgical process, spiritual surgery, soul surgery. We're asking the divine surgeon, whatever that means to you, to come in and to surgically remove the resentment that we have. I love to use the word exorcism for this work. Not in a religious sense, please, but in the connotation of the work itself. There is a power that removes the bedevilments in me. Bill uses that word on page 52 of the big book, bedevilments. I don't want to go at length in anything from the big book, but I'm making these references and hope you can sort of see the puzzle pieces come together so that you can see the whole picture. I'm powerless over this cancer. And if I hold this cancer and it's not released and removed, it will metastasize and it will suffocate the life in me through suffering and anger. And my spirit will die, it will wither. And I'll develop cancer, and I'll develop stress, and I'll develop heart attack and other human misery. We pray on the daily basis for the removal of my resentment toward my father. It took 3 months, and the rest of the step process, 5 through 9. But when I finished the amends process in the cemetery for my dead father, for the removal of my hurt and my anger and my negativity, I walked out of there a free person. Freedom, as I mentioned in the beginning. This is the goal here, freedom from this negativity, from this anger, from these resentments. Step 4 was the first experience I had with this. Did I say step 4? I meant column 4 of the resentment inventory, that final paragraph on page 67 that identifies our motives. Column 3 identifies the beliefs. Doesn't say that. That's my experience with it. Column 4 identifies our motives. It doesn't say that. That's my experience with it. I put it into my own words to try to help me understand what the purpose of this process is, to look at my motives. There's 5 questions. All of them are about me. What am I thinking? What am I doing? That behavior I talked about earlier. What is my fear? Where am I being dishonest? What is my role? You hear it all the time in the meetings. What is your part? I understand the spirit of it. It's just wrong. I don't have a part in my resentments. I don't have a part in my anger. I don't have a part in my life. I have 100%. I have the whole thing. People and circumstances just do what people and circumstances do. People and circumstances are not my problem. Oh, they're up to their own mischief and self-centeredness and the manifestation of those self-centeredness in their own anger and fear and dishonesty. Absolutely. Lots of mischief from a human standpoint, sometimes even criminal, most of the time tragic and unfortunate. Absolutely. People and circumstances do what they do. It's my reaction to people and circumstances that is my problem. They are not my problem. It's my reaction. So I have to ask myself, why am I reacting this way? I had a man approach me, 20 years of sobriety, a pretty decent relationship with the 12 steps. And he said, Herb, they're pressing my buttons. You've heard me say it before. Again, it's a classic example. I said, well, whose buttons are they? Whoa, they're mine. Well, then remove the buttons. That's my responsibility. If I have buttons, I've created them. I have created them. If I have buttons to push, I've put them out for people to push. The whole purpose of the transformation is to remove the buttons, to live undefended. Huge word. Put it in the context of what I'm talking about, though. I don't have to defend myself. I have to be conscious of my thoughts and my feelings and my behavior and the motives and the beliefs that I have that generate all of that. Listing the harms that those negative feelings and reactions cause. Who did I diminish? What did I do? What was the harm? Again, lots of misinformation there. My harm is not my behavior. My harm is the impact, negative impact on other people of my behavior. How did I diminish their lives? What do I do? What do I need to do to repair their lives? I can't change history, but one of my teachers talked about balancing the scale of justice. Am I willing to take specific actions, number one, for me to change, and number two, to repair the damage that I've done in some practical or some creative spiritual way? There's lots of creative, spiritual, psychological ways that we can balance the scale by making amends. Describing what I've done and asking them, is there anything else? Describing how I plan on repairing the damage and asking, is there anything else? A most difficult process that needed experienced direction. I don't believe anybody can do an effective process of amends on their own because we're the subject and we get very tangled in our subjectivity and our feelings. Well, they hurt me more than I ever did them. Yeah, well, that's interesting. It's just irrelevant. It's irrelevant. What they did is, it's an explanation, and it may be unfortunate, as I said before, even criminal. But it's irrelevant because it's my feelings about it that are my problem. My problem. I don't have a part. I have 100%. I own it. I take responsibility. That's one of the major points I believe that Dr. Luskin makes about personal responsibility, accepting reality as it is. That's a huge concept. Reality isn't personal. Reality is immutable. It can't change. Reality is non-negotiable. Reality does not care who I am, what I think, what I want, what I've experienced, how I feel, what I expect. Reality just is reality, as Byron Katie would say, but only 100% of the time. We're in bondage if we don't know. We're in bondage if we don't see. And the whole point is to know and to see and then to do. Notice in this pathetic Herbie is still in jail because he doesn't have a perspective. There's no ceiling, there's no walls, there's no floor in this picture. But Herbie is holding on to the bars and looking through them as if that's reality, because that's his story. He's a victim. And until he releases his grip on those bars, he won't find freedom. And that's the process. A decision to release them, and paradoxically to be released. A process, not an event. That's why I use that dimmer switch analogy. Forgiveness is not to, and you've seen this if you've been exposed to my work before, and it's in my Way of Life document on my website. Way of Life document. It's a document of 66 pages that supports the work of the 12-step process over a long year, a weekly, year-long process. Forgiveness is not to condone or forget or excuse or minimize or even reconcile. I'm giving you just some of the words. We don't have to be part of our family. We don't have to be friends with the people in our lives. We get to choose that when we get free and get a perspective. Forgiveness is a decision to not retaliate, etc., exact revenge, seek compensation, judge, but it is a decision to release them, a decision to release them. There will be some action. The critical part of all of this is the action that we take. And then paradoxically, as I mentioned, we are released. Freedom is the goal here. Fred Luskin, I'm going to introduce here in a minute, has a process that's very similar. He says, name it. What is the hurt? That's what we do in column 3. Understand it. What's your hope? That's what we do in column 3 and column 4. Identify the rules in your beliefs. I found that especially in column 3 of the resentment inventory. Acknowledge reality, my attitude. That was particularly revealed to me in the column 4. Take responsibility. Again, you heard me talk about 100% responsible to accept the reality of that. It's huge, it's embarrassing, and it doesn't feel right. And yet, once we get a perspective on it, it is 100% the truth. To take the actions to repair the damage, to take the actions to change my behavior so that I'm not repeating behavior that has created negativity in my life.
I love that.
I'm in bondage until I'm not. I make a decision, I get some information, I take some action, I take some more action, I take some more action, and I get guidance from people who have experience. It's a daily practice. This is the practical part now. I'm going to end with this. A commitment to intentional consciousness. Some people call it meditation, some people call it prayer, some people call it consciousness, some people call it mindfulness. I call it intentional consciousness. To create a gratitude list so that we're looking at the light, growing in positivity. Prayer is merely that relationship, intimate conversation with the life force of the universe, reducing the darkness and increasing the light. Meditation, that improving of our consciousness of a relationship, conscious relationship with ourselves, a conscious relationship with the life force, whatever that means, attempting to live in intuition and inspiration, guidance and power. Eventually allowing that organically to manifest in helpful actions, kindness, compassion, and then hold ourselves accountable for it. There's an open mic someplace, please close it. And then accountability for all of these commitments. A daily practice. Page 85 in the big book, I think it is. says we are placed in a position of neutrality with regard to our addiction, but we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve, and the work is inventory on a spot check basis, step 10. And the work is meditation on a daily basis and the continuation of inventory in the evening. And the work is to live a life of principles, guiding, and I use principles as guidelines and guardrails, with an overall perspective on a 24/7 basis of how can I help? How can I contribute to the world and the people around me? In my meditation, it came to me, a forgiving person has no past. We're released. But an unforgiving person has no future. We're in the bondage. A process of change of attitude, accepting life as it is, and managing our behavior in terms of principles of reality. Those actions. You want to know who you are? Look at your behavior. You want to know what your principles are? Look at how your feet move. Very confrontational, very practical, because it's black and white. If you're robbing banks, you're a bank robber. There's no white lies. If you're being dishonest, you're a liar. These are the truths of reality. How free do you want to be? How soon? How free do you want to be? How soon? There's Fred. Hello, Fred. Thank you for coming on. I'm glad to be here. And this is my friend and colleague and co-facilitator. We've done a couple things together, and I'm in admiration of his work, and I think he tolerates me. So, Fred, it's up to you now.
Well, hi, nice to see you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I had told Herb that I would come on today and talk a bit about self-forgiveness. But I'm going to say my thinking around self-forgiveness has changed over the years. It's not that I don't think it's important. And it's not that I don't think it should be taught. It's what's changed in me is I believe now there's way too much of it. That in particular our like indulgent world, we let ourselves off the hook all the time. And like we are too self-forgiving, I would say. And my guess is if you have a substance abuse problem, that's part of your issue, is that, you know, you excuse and mollify and bullshit your behavior away. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't legitimate needs for self-forgiveness and there aren't steps, and I can show you that. But our culture has become so therapized.
Yes.
And so, like, how do you feel about everything? Like, the other piece of this is that your feelings are just not that important, except to you. They're indicators. They're signs. But in and of themselves, that's all they are. I'm angry. Like, so what? But, and again, that's not minimizing the important information value of our feelings. That's why we have them. is they explain to us how we're organizing our experience and the conclusion we've reached about the valence or the meaning of the experience. So being angry at something just means that you've reached a certain conclusion about it, unless it's a direct threat to you at that moment. But if you're thinking about other people's behavior or your behavior from the past, it's only the result of a story or certain ways you talk to yourself. But the anger itself is simply it's a catching your attention of how you're processing things. And that's good. But we're way, way, way too self-forgiving of ourselves. And that, again, in our therapizing culture, which should be teaching, in my mind, way more, I'm sorry, and how can I make it right? I mean, those are the important parts of self-forgiveness. I can cut to the chase right now. I'm sorry, how can I make it right? Are way, way more important than how you feel. Now, that again, I've been in this a long time. I know Herb's been in this a long time. There aren't just these simple, broad statements. But your feelings are less important than you think. They're indications. And they're like signs on a road saying, go this way or go that way, or everything you've done in the past has led you to point in this direction. That's what our feelings are. They're not trivial. But most people think self-forgiveness means we have to stop feeling angry about ourselves, or we have to stop feeling guilt about ourselves, or shame. Now, those are good things, sometimes. I'm not convinced that shame is such a terrible thing if we did something with it. When we hold it as just a feeling, it's kind of meaningless. But when we say, I'm ashamed of what I did and I want to go make it right, then shame is necessary or helpful. Again, none of these feelings are great for your lifetime, but they're useful for a while. And I have more concern with people who don't feel shame than with people who do. I'm just like, they're more dangerous to me. The ones without a well-developed conscience and a well-developed sense of, ooh, I screwed up. But where I wanted to start this was there's an intersection between real self-forgiveness, which only occurs when you make things right. Like now some things you can't make right in a certain way, but you don't merit self-forgiveness until you asked for, often an apology, asked for what you can do to make it right, and maybe changed your behavior. That's when you merit self-forgiveness. But the feeling piece is not that important. So if you're angry that you misbehaved or harmed somebody, that's fine. It's an indication you did something wrong. What matters to get to self-forgiveness, a lot of it is, well, did I apologize appropriately? Did I really work to take responsibility for what I did? Did I try to make it right where I could? Did I, repair stuff? And did I do something so that it won't happen again? Those are the crucial elements that lead to appropriate self-forgiveness. And those go against our like kind of therapeutic, everything boils down to how you feel kind of culture. The important part about forgiveness is it kind of gives us a restart, wipes the slate clean. You want that slate wiped clean. When it's you holding a resentment towards someone else, wiping the slate clean means you stop blaming them for your life. So that's forgiveness, like they're not responsible for me anymore. Like I'm responsible for me, so I can move ahead. But it doesn't come without grieving, without grief, without suffering, without going through a lot of the shit that human beings have to go through to deal with stuff, the emotional stuff, the loss, the pain, all that. You have to go through this. But after you go through, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, some anger, some sadness, some, like, not me, folks, some bargaining, some acceptance. Forgiveness means like you're free of it. Okay, I paid my dues, the suffering. I evaluated it. I released it. These are critical. Critical. But in self-forgiveness, you're the one who did harm. So it's not just enough to emotionally release. That's the crucial distinction. You did harm either to yourself, so your alcohol or drug abuse, you harmed people. You harmed yourself. It's not enough to just emotionally go, well, we're at kumbaya. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But what I'm getting at is that's one of the big differences between forgiveness of others and forgiveness of yourself. With forgiveness of others, wiping the slate emotionally clean is the central piece of it. And it takes some suffering and some work. With forgiving yourself, wiping the slate emotionally clean is concomitant with doing something about your bad behaviors. It's not as simple a free pass as, well, I did the best I could. That may be true. You did the best you could. But if your best you could is an F minus, you still got amends to make. And you still may need to change. You may need to alter your behavior. You may need to alter your behavior. Or you may actually have to make real amends. Like, you're right, I screwed up. So I'm going to pay you now 500 bucks a month for the next couple of years to make up for all the time you bailed me out. Then you're clean for self-forgiveness. Then you deserve and have earned self-forgiveness. The good news is, though, like once you have made amends, said you're sorry where appropriate, and maybe changed, then there's absolutely no justification or reason to beat yourself up for anything. Like, that's the blessing of self-forgiveness. When you've actually done the stuff that heals, you don't have to accept anybody's criticism or castigation anymore. I paid my dues. So self-forgiveness is a deeper quality than forgiving others. And the real stuff is harder, because you have to change, or at least start the process of change. You can't just say, hey, I screwed up, give me another chance. That's great. But until you alter your behavior, if it continues to harm people, you haven't merited self-forgiveness. And that's a tough hook, but I do believe that that's the real purpose of our conscience, is to be straight with ourselves. Now, again, the flip side of that is when you really are honest about who you've harmed and you take responsibility, then again, you no longer have to identify at all with the person who did the harm. Like, you don't have to carry that forever. So if you were a particularly poor partner to somebody, and then you did everything you could to apologize, make amends, and change, you don't have to buy their identification of you forever as a poor partner. Because self-forgiveness does wipe it clean, but it only comes after you've done what you can. The good news is you don't have to buy anybody's projection anymore of there being anything wrong with you. We're allowed to fail. We're all failures at some level. We fail all the time. The responsibility is that we try to make it right. And that when we have tried to make it right and done some of the emotional freeing work, then it's perfectly okay for us to release ourselves from that judgment. You're not a bad person. But it takes action and behavior change, not just reducing the anger or the self-attack or whatever things you feel towards yourself. Those end up being kind of trivial. So an example, just a simple example, many, many, many years ago, I was teaching a forgiveness class, and this lovely older woman asked a question. She said, I was a terrible parent. And I don't really remember why. She said, I was a terrible parent, and now my kids won't allow me back in their lives. And I feel terrible. I've apologized, but they've turned me away. And she said, what can I do? And I said, well, I believe that you may still have a step left, which is the harm you did to your children or grandchildren. You may still have to do something about that. So I made a suggestion to her that she go to the local elementary school and volunteer to read to some kids who didn't have a grandma. That's making amends. It's not always to the people you harmed. This is a universe. This is one earth. And when we do harm against a piece on that earth, at some level, we have to go back and clean up our mess. So if this woman had legitimately told her kids, I'm really sorry, it was my bad, and if I ever blamed that on you, boy, was that a bad. I'm sorry. I'll do whatever I can. Do you need me to write out my faults? You know, do you need me to just sit on your doorstep for a month? What do you need? And I've changed. Now, I don't know how to prove that to you, but I've changed. I've gone through therapy, whatever it is, 12-step programs, or I've had this intense conversation with, somebody. And over the last couple of years, I recognize, and I'd like to make it up to you. I'd like to be a good grandparent. Well, if the kid says no, that need to make it up doesn't go away in the kind of karmic sense. And so these are some of the responsibilities that we have before we can fully and completely say, I forgive myself. But I do believe that we are absolutely entitled to forgive ourselves. I do not believe that we should rot in hell, or that there's eternal or even irredeemable things. That we're all flawed. And we're all we don't know enough. And we're all selfish. And we all misread signals all over the place. So we're gonna screw up. These whole ideas of cancel culture, where people are punished for something they said 10 years ago, that's anathema to me. We make mistakes. And I believe the universe gives us a chance through real forgiveness to wipe it clean and start reasonably fresh. But the hard part is when we're forgiving ourselves, to not remain focused on our feelings, which is an example of selfishness, but focus on the people we have harmed. That's the essential earning of self-forgiveness. Transferring the self-absorption which led to our poor behavior. When you're just focused on how you feel, you're continuing that self-absorption. But when you get out of that a little and say, now, where did my behaviors and actions influence? That's when self-forgiveness becomes reasonably easy. When you recognize, well, all I really have to do is just be honest and humble and try to make it right as best I can. And not everything can be made right. But we need to make the effort towards that. So I see an enormous amount of cheap self-forgiveness. Really cheap, like garbage stuff. Yeah, I made peace with that. But that doesn't mean anything. If you've made peace just with your emotional world, that's trivial, and it's all about us. We need to join into the relational world where peace is harder. With other forgiveness, it's not shallow. It requires an accounting of the harm done and an acknowledgement of the necessity of our suffering. Forgiveness doesn't eliminate suffering, but it allows it to have closure. Like that's like real self-forgiveness comes at the end of suffering, of course, just like forgiving others comes at the end of suffering. But it's a closure of that. It's not a eliminating of it. If you screw up, you should suffer. And it doesn't mean you have to suffer for years. But how else do you learn? If there isn't regret and some guilt and some shame, there's something wrong with you. Like I mean, I'm just saying you're missing part of what makes us importantly human is that we can evaluate our behavior and be disappointed and, feel bad over it and struggle to self-correct. Those are essential things to your humanity. And I some of again the psychotherapeutic stuff about you shouldn't feel guilty, you should never have shame, I think is ridiculous and dangerous. And if you committed real harm, you should probably have guilt for a while. I mean, I'm not talking about the rest of your life, but you might want to suffer for a few months so you absolutely never do it again and you can tell other people about how bad it feels. There's these emotions are all useful. And our culture is way too oriented to anesthetizing our feelings, not using them. Guilt can be a real good reminder not to do this again. And shame is appropriate at times. It is. Just like anger is appropriate at times. You just don't want to make it your calling card. So I'm going to do a short meditation, just because so much of what we teach, and I'm sure it's any legitimate psycho-spiritual thing, you have to center somewhere. And none of this positive healing can be done without some centering. It can't. The mind that, got us into all of our trouble, it needs to quiet a little before it can get us out of our trouble. It's just the way it is. So I'm going to do a meditation for a few minutes. And then probably a little bit after that, I'm going to show you the slides that I have for our kind of steps to self-forgiveness. But I wanted to do a real overview before I did anything of where my thinking has evolved around self-forgiveness. I know the 12-step programs are huge on accountability. And I've gotten more strong about that as time has gone by. That we're obligated to check out our behavior. And that's what we have responsibility for in this world. Anyway, if you'd all be willing to do like a 5-minute guided imagery practice with me, it would be helpful if you moved your phones away so you're not distracted. And then just, futz around a little bit so you can get comfortable in your chair. Just, be ready to sit for a few minutes. And then if you'd be willing to close your eyes, we can begin. And the beginning is always just sit quietly and allow your attention to go inside. And when you bring your attention inside, just cultivate it as a gentle practice. Just I'm very gently kind of withdrawing my attention from outside of me and the world, but I'm also withdrawing my attention from the future and the past. I'm just going to bring my attention inside for now. And when you do that, if you do that, you will find yourself quieting down a little. You will find yourself just quieting down a little bit. And your breathing will quiet down. And when your breathing quiets down, what happens is it becomes a little bit gentler and a little bit slower. And it's important to be comfortable with that gentling and slowing. That it's a different pace, just quieter and softer and gentler. And you want to, when you inhale, you want to focus on allowing your abdomen to expand when you inhale. And when you exhale, you want to focus on allowing your abdomen to contract. And then you just want to bring an image to your mind of someone you love. And I've done this here before, but just bring an image to your mind of someone you love. And you use that because you want to try to feel affection. And you just want to sit for another moment with like just feeling like comfortable and warm and affectionate, but not necessarily without an object, just affectionate and warm. And then just let that go. Let the feeling go, let the image go. Allow yourself to take a breath. Very gently open your eyes, but don't fidget. Just sit for a moment. And the reason that we've done practices like this is I heard Herb talking before about reality. Um, we need to be able to see the reality of our own behavior without getting too lost in our reactions to it. But that the bogus self-forgiveness just tries to soothe it. And real self-forgiveness is able to see ourselves clearly. And that takes a lot of guts. And it's not easy to actually be accountable for our own actions and deeds and thoughts. So part of it is that we have, let's just say, the ability to relax into a place in us that is able to hold reality without fighting it. That, yeah, you can see yourself as somebody who screwed up or was incredibly selfish. That may be reality. But it's not reality that means you're a terrible person. And it's not reality that the past has to follow you forever. But it is necessary to be able to, like, somewhat objectively recognize our behaviors and our impact. The good news is that when you're quiet inside, or when you feel more loving, you're actually more capable of seeing things objectively than if you're angry or shamed. Like those are not feeling states designed to give you a glimpse of reality. They're feeling states designed to get you to do something, to stop something. You see more reality more clearly when you're at peace, because you don't have such an overlay of reactivity and judgment on it. This is essential for any real self-forgiveness. And it's hard. It's hard to tell somebody that, you harmed, that the basic reason you harmed them is that you were so wrapped up in your own needs that they didn't mean anything to you. But that's reality. And that's why you did it, that you were self-absorbed, that you had an addiction or a compulsion or a habit, whatever it is. and that habit propelled you, and the impact on the other was not relevant to you. But that's what reality was. And so if you're going to forgive yourself, you have to tell the truth. But once you tell the truth, and once you try to make it right, then you can let it go. There's not much else you can do with it. You know, okay, so you screwed up big time. It's like, take a number. You know what I mean? It's like we've all screwed up big time. I mean, that's the truth. It's like being at a deli counter and being given a number. But it's the people who don't admit that they were at the deli counter. You know what I mean? Those are the ones who, and then 2 years later, they say, well, I'm tired of feeling bad about this, so I'm going to let it go. That has nothing really to do with self-forgiveness. It's a separate thing. It's like, you know, like not even forgiveness light, something else. But real forgiveness is, this is what I did. And I chose it. Now, I may have chosen it under the umbrella of a compulsion. And so, you know, it's not so simple that every single day I just chose to be an asshole. Once you get that going, habit's a tough thing to break. But what the point of this is that inside of you, there's a place to hold even your failures with less judgment. So you can just admit them. It's not that big a deal, especially if you talk to another human being who's honest about themselves. You know, it's like join the crowd.
In that context, Fred, could you talk about regret? Because that's really a little bit of what you're talking about there. Because there is regret about the being a jerk, and that's part of I think a healthy process of letting it go is not to spend a lot of time on regret. Would you talk about it a little bit?
It's like the South African Commission was truth and then reconciliation. My interest is, as a psychologist, is the internal, but it requires certain externalities of honesty. The meditative part is for us, is to soften our judgments. That's the meditative part. We can learn to breathe into our judgments. And that's one way that we release them, is you breathe into them. So let me just give a very simple practice around that. Just a simple breathe. This is nothing more than just breathing. With your eyes open, because this is like just real world practice. Remember something, or even something you did recently that you wish you hadn't. You know? And there's so many of these things. It's like they don't have to be big things. It could be somebody called you and they asked you to spend some time with them because they needed somebody to talk and you didn't want to talk. So you made a white lie about, no, well, you know, I have to go watch the lights change and I can't break that date. But you would probably benefit from opening honestly to your selfishness and just letting it go after you said to yourself, okay, I'll call them back and I'll say, you know, I'm sorry I wasn't available. Can we talk now? Very simple. But I'd like you to think of a time when you didn't behave up to your hoped for standards. And just picture a time where you felt, it could be recent, a little bit of shame, grief, negativity, where you got an ouch. And that's plenty. There's your owie moment. Now is all we need to do is when we collect an owie moment, relax our diaphragm, relax our belly, shift our attention from our head to our lower abdomen. Take a breath or two. Deeply inhale. Deeply exhale. And let the owie go. If you breathe deeply and gently, you won't hold it. And that's plenty. But that's a very simple practice to use on our self-judgments, our self-attacks. This is not a big deal. This is not like, oh, I'm the worst human being in the world. This is just, if I've already learned from this. See, that's the key thing. If you get a feeling of remorse, regret, guilt, whatever it is, shame, and you've never gone there before, don't breathe it away. Let it in. Learn from it. Confront your behavior. Don't run from it. It's your teacher at that moment. Thank God you're still healthy enough to have regret. It's a wonderful thing. So the first couple of times that you have a regret, negative experience, don't do anything but welcome it. The 30th time, you don't need it anymore. Maybe even the 15th time, you don't need it anymore. Once you know, see, this is how the progression goes. The first 5 times, you desperately need the information, which is, I screwed up. I deserve to feel bad about this. This is the universe's way of helping bring my attention to something where I did wrong. Absolutely helpful. It may feel bad, but it's like cleaning a wound. Great. The next 5 times, maybe it's not so simple. Maybe it's, this is starting to become a habit, and, I'm not really growing, but I still have some room on this. By time 20, you've created a pattern around it. Either, ooh, I'm a terrible person and I deserve to suffer, or some bullshit about how somebody else was responsible, or I just, I'm used to this and I'm not paying attention to it anymore. So those 3 things you don't need. You're not a terrible person. Nobody else forced you. And once you've stopped growing from something, let it go. The second question, though, is, as you're letting it go, have I done the work? Have I apologized? I know I felt bad about blowing this person off, but did I either not blow somebody off that I wanted to blow off because I owed a debt for this, which is fine. So if you feel bad about something and somebody else calls you and said, are you free Tuesday? And you're actually not free Tuesday, but you knew that you did wrong and you said, yeah, I'll make myself free Tuesday because I need to make it something right. That's great. But if there's no longer any information or growth coming from something, let it go. But we have to do something about it. So you can call your friend and say you're sorry. Just a simple I'm sorry. I just couldn't, I wasn't capable of social engagement then. And I'm sorry I wasn't either available to you or more straight, whatever. I'm sorry. Or if it's a pattern in you where you're unreliable, you got to look at that. Like that's how we learn. And then once you recognize, ooh, I really am not a great friend. I may not have recognized this before, but I'm not generous. I don't really care what other people need. I'm just thinking about how I feel. This is not pretty. So if you recognize that, then you think to yourself, well, I have to change something. And when that process has done, forgive yourself and let it go completely. Because you're not the same person anymore. You're not the selfish bad friend. You're somebody who took information in, looked at it realistically, said, there's some truth to this, I better change. Then you're fully free to say, hey, Fred, you weren't a good friend, you learned. So you don't have to see yourself this way anymore. What I'm getting at is that is the more mature process of self-forgiveness, that kind of mature process.
Just FYI, Fred also has another book. I don't know the order in which it was published, but it's called Forgive for Love. The original book I was talking about was Forgive for Good. And then I read his book, Forgive for Love, which is talking about the forgiveness process, specifically in relationships with somebody else. And it's equally wonderful. So. Looks like he's putting up some slides now.
Hello again, everyone.
Hi. I was just mentioning your other book, Forgive for Love, and I enjoyed that equally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go through our little slide thing, and anybody who wants these, you'd be welcome to them. I'll go through them, and then I'll take, if there are a question or two, I'll take that.
Right.
But let me just tell you what these. I'm trying to remember how these came about. I think we had a postdoc for about 2 years, not that long ago, who took a look at all my 20th century, promotional materials, and rightfully told me they were like 40 years out of date. And I don't care about stuff like that. It's just not my intelligence. So he made he made me nice slides for all sorts of things that I had been doing, but not in any way as nicely. So this is a gift that keeps on giving. The first thing is we figured out, and this is a long time ago, we figured out that there were 4 general categories for things that people need to forgive themselves for. It's just helpful every now and then to have schema and categories to organize experience. But that there are just different things, and different people are kind of I'm not using the word upset, but that they have different offenses. So the first is like you failed at a significant life task. You know, you didn't create a good career, or you didn't have a successful marriage, or you didn't raise children successfully, or you botched your health. Some people's self-forgiveness is because um, that they failed at something, that there was some goal. I set up a business and then I was too preoccupied, or I was gambling too much, or I never learned the skills. Like it could be just that I never learned the skills to do it. But the overarching thing is I failed at a significant life task. Second, your actions hurt somebody, like things you did or didn't do, omissions, commissions, but they were your actions. They were things that you had some volition in. You chose. You chose to help or not help. I mean, whatever. But this is one of the other things that many, many, many people struggle with. And good or bad, most of us have some modest amounts of this. The next thing is you've hurt yourself by engaging in self-destructive behaviors like overeating, alcoholism, addiction. We're spending 18 hours a day playing video games. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. But it's not external that you failed at a life task. It's that your behavior was repetitive and destructive for you. I'm sure it could have been destructive for others, but the self-forgiveness is around the fact that I let myself down by behaving in a repetitive way that was not good. The last one is you failed to do something, a task that was helpful. Maintaining a college fund, having a solid retirement plan, could be getting exercise, eating like vegetables, drinking tea, whatever it was, but that you thought this was important and you didn't do it. So sometimes these interweave with each other. So, if you had a problem with substance abuse and, you didn't eat well because of it, and your actions of not showing up to pick up your kids harmed your spouse, and you messed up your marriage, well, that's a 4 for 4. But there's different aspects of it, and different people have different components at different times. This was just to point out that self-forgiveness is not a unitary thing. There are different ways about it. Okay, the next one is the first part of self-forgiveness is that you have to articulate the specific wrong you did and the harm it caused. It's not enough to just articulate what you did. You have to count for the harm. And that can be challenging to the ego. Yeah, it's not trivial to say my neglect caused my kids to spend 3 years in therapy, or my abandonment of my partner led them rightfully not to trust people for a while. Again, this is part of that maturity. The part of the antidote, of course, is to find a couple people you trust and share them. Share your experiences. Now, the 12-step program build this in. But I would say, from my understanding of the research, it's important in life to simply have a couple of people you trust so you can share who you really are with them. Most of the time, we play pretend games with each other about who we really are. And it works as a social lubricant, but it doesn't give us the place to do some of the work that we need to do. So, and also remember that being honest about what you've done and what you've been through keeps you from slipping into denial, suppression, repression, and forgetfulness. So denial is, nah, that wasn't me. Suppression is, I'm not gonna feel it. Repression is, I'm not gonna even remember it. And forgetfulness can be deliberate. You can obfuscate a little bit. Well, I'm not sure that was me, or, I was, it's a low level of bullshit. But what's helpful is the sharing of our humanity, our imperfect humanity, helps us be straight, but it also keeps us from qualities that aren't that useful to ourselves. Okay. The next thing, this is the self-forgiveness. You don't always have to reconcile if you hurt somebody else. Sometimes relationships end. Sometimes relationships were not the right relationship. So you could have been in an intimate relationship where you were terrible to each other. And it's not, that relationship was not the right place for either of you. So it doesn't necessarily mean that self-forgiveness means that somehow you have to go back and you have to repair everything. That's not necessary always. Sometimes it is. But you want to get rid of the shame after feeling it, release the blame, and find freedom from the past, which is, it's not dominating my behavior now. But the key piece to this is, when you get rid of all this garbage, then you have a chance to feel the calm, peaceful wholeness at the center of your being. And you don't want to forget that piece of it. That denial, minimization, those are all obscuring emotions. Shame, blame, guilt, those are intermediary emotions when you acknowledge the reality of your behavior and your actions and your experiences. But you don't want to live with shame, guilt, or anything either. What you want to do is, it's a process so you can find peace again. That's the purpose of forgiveness, is to find peace again. It's not to stay guilty or full of shame. Those are just placeholders that are like part of the healing from all the denial and garbage. But you don't want to stay there. And that's really, really important, is to recognize that those are not endpoints, those are process points. So unrealistic expectations are part of the forgiveness healing. Some of our shame and some of our guilt and some of our self-attack don't just come from our behavior, but from our unenforceable rules that we have, or our unreasonable expectations about ourselves. So some of us, grow up with a rule: I have to be perfect. And so if they're not perfect, they trigger all sorts of nonsense. Or I have to be successful. Or if I don't do X, no one will love me. There's all sorts of crazy rules. We all have them. But when we are filled with shame and bitterness, there's a realistic part of shame and bitterness that we have to address. Like, we did harm, we did wrong, and it caused harm. So that's realistic. There's a part of shame and bitterness that are not realistic, that come from our unrealistic expectations. And self-forgiveness, part of it is to separate that out. So yeah, I may have done bad things, but I'm not a bad person. Or I may have lied, but that doesn't mean I don't know truth from lying. I know the difference. Or I definitely was selfish, but it doesn't mean I'm always selfish. Or it doesn't mean that being selfish sometimes makes me a terrible human being. Or it doesn't mean that I wasn't in relationship with people who were just as selfish as I was. So part of this process is accepting the legitimate remorse, grief, shame that comes from accurate appraisals of our behavior, and working on releasing the parts of shame, grief that come from unrealistic expectations that are usually more absolute and require perfection. This can take some time. For some people, this requires professional help. This is, some people can generate an awful lot of self-attack that is way out of proportion to their actual behavior. So these are not trivial concepts, this complexity of self-forgiveness. So the next piece is, I did a little meditation with you. It's that the stress, feelings, and thoughts of guilt are happening now. And they're not actually about the past. They're about what we are creating now. And that's a crucial distinction. this is how you fully self-forgive, is when you recognize that when let's say I've been honest with a couple of people about what I've done, I've tried to make amends, I've changed. Let's say I still have a bad feeling about myself. At that moment, since you've done what you can, the most appropriate thing is to breathe it away and let it go. You don't need it anymore at all. Because what we're experiencing is about now. Our feelings are now. But the behaviors in the past, those, whatever it is that you really need self-forgiveness for, they need to be addressed over time. But it doesn't mean that we have to suffer now. So I'm going to do that same meditation that I did like an hour ago, but in a much quicker time frame, to just bring it into a more present-centered thing. So if you'd all please, the first one I did was like 6-7 minutes. This will be 40 seconds. So just please close your eyes. I just want to give you a sense of that you really can let it go. Just close your eyes. And again, bring your attention inward. And then shift your attention to your abdomen and take 2 really slow, deep breaths. And when you inhale, fill your belly with air. And when you exhale, push out the air. It's an active process of breathing. And then bring an image to your mind of someone you adore. Bring a loving, warm, rich, loving, just bring that image of someone you adore to your mind. And feel the affection. And then let that go. Take a breath and allow your eyes to open. That probably took longer than was needed because I can feel how quickly people can do it, but you can shorten that to 20 seconds or less. Just center, breathe deeply, remember something really positive in your life, and let it go. Let it go. You're just letting it, you're releasing it from your body. Let it go. You don't need it anymore. That doesn't eliminate the deeper requirement for seeing reality, making amends, and changing. But you don't need to suffer for the rest of your days because at that moment you're remembering something that was unresolved. That's a crucial distinction. You don't need to suffer it forever for a mistake or a harm done. What you need to do is make it right. I really refer to it as cleaning up our messes. You know, if you spill milk somewhere, you got to clean it up. It doesn't matter how good or bad you feel about it. You can feel terrible about it and feel like you're the worst person. You still just need to get a broom out there and clean it up and get a mop, and then you're done. And if it knocks something over and you need to pay the wherever it is for it, you pay them for it. But we're here to clean up our messes before we go wherever it is we go to our next life experience. We're here to clean up our messes. That's just a part of how I see this. Okay. Then this is just a rumination reminder. Again, once you've reminded yourself 20 times that you did wrong, there's no need for 21. I that sounds so simple, but it is simple. But sometimes you do need the 20. That's what I'm getting at. Sometimes you really do need the 20, but you don't need the 21. Sometimes you need 10. Sometimes you need 5. You need to be absolutely clear about what happened and the harm done, but you don't need to beat yourself up. A very crucial distinction. Um, okay. Let me just find the next one. So this is just make sure you apologize. And I'm sure most of you know the kind of research demonstrated elements of a sincere apology, not a BS apology. So a BS apology is, I'm sorry you feel bad. That's called hostility disguised as apology. I'm sorry you feel bad doesn't mean anything. In fact, it usually makes people like you less. A real apology is, I did something wrong or didn't do something right that impacted your life for the worse. That's what an apology is. It's about my behavior and its impact on you. It tends not to be big on excuses or rationalizations. It's my behavior caused your suffering. For that, I'm sorry. And I will do what I can to make sure I do not do this again. That's the element of a real apology. That's simple, direct, clear, but those are the aspects of apologies that have been shown to facilitate in others forgiveness of us. The insincere or BS apologies do not appear to have much impact in a positive way. That people want to know that we recognize that it was our behavior. that our intentions may have been noble, but they don't eliminate the harm that we did. If we had good intentions, it's not a terrible thing to say them, but it's also important to let the person know that the intentions about us, unfortunately, the harm was done to them. And so we own that good intentions were not sufficient, but we want them out there because, yeah, there was no malice in our part. This was just, and anyway, okay. The next one is what I just gave you. The practice PERT. Bring attention to your stomach. Bring to your mind's eye an image of someone you love. And just try to feel it. And that's how you let it go in your body. That's how we, in our bodies, practice. Okay. Where am I here? Make it right. You all know about making amends from the 12-step programs, but amends are essential to self-forgiveness. They're probably one of the cornerstones of it. And the last thing of this is probably the central takeaway of this whole thing. Do good rather than feel bad. I can't emphasize that more. That's the key to this. Do good rather than feel bad. Do something. Help somebody. Make something better. Make your own life better. You know? If you feel bad about your own past behavior of abusing your body, go to the gym. You know, it's like do something. Do something helpful to somebody, including yourself. And these are simple, but true. Okay. And the ultimate purpose of forgiveness is the story that we tell. So once you've made amends, it's time to let go of the old story. What we need is a new story that has us as a normal, frail, mistake-prone, forgivable human being. And what changes from in a self-forgiveness story is before the self-forgiveness, we tended to stop the story around where we had done wrong. The self-forgiveness story keeps it going. So yeah, I did screw up. And then here's what I learned. And here's how I made amends. And now I'm free. The story changes. And the key aspect of forgiveness is a change in story. Without that, we really don't have forgiveness. That's the cornerstone of it, is to go from a story of grievance, either about ourselves or others, to a story that doesn't end with the grievance, but talks about what we've learned, how we've grown, how we've made amends, how we've broadened our perspective, whatever it is. It just allows us to move ahead without denying or minimizing the hurt, but the story doesn't stop with the hurt. The other part of getting rid of the wicked witch story is the self-forgiveness story is more about the future than the past. So instead of just talking or telling yourself how bad you are, the self-forgiveness story says, yeah, I screwed up. And here's what I learned. And here's how life's going to be different. It's a forward-looking story, not a backward-looking story. And that's what the essence of forgiveness is. It's a change in story from looking backwards to looking forward with some hope. That's the central defining quality of forgiveness. Is the story that we tell ourselves and other people adapts to less about the past and more about the present and future. The present can be what I'm doing about it. The future can be about how I'm gonna, my new goals. The grieving story is about the past. That's what distinguishes it. A healthier story, it takes the past and uses that past to adapt to a different future. Okay. This is also important for self-forgiveness. That we're not just people who did harm. And we're not just people who did wrong. And that's the problem with a grievance mentality. It limits us to either our or others' bad behavior. What we want is reality. And reality is we're all flawed, imperfect, and we try to help sometimes, and sometimes we don't. But just because you didn't help doesn't mean that you never help. And so a piece of self-forgiveness is always to remind you that you also do good and that you're kind-hearted and thoughtful. Again, we aren't reality. We don't want a Pollyanna reality about ourselves, and we don't want we're Attila the Hun reality. We want reality, which is that we're flawed people like everyone else, and that we have good things and bad things and mediocre things and all sorts of stuff. But part of self-forgiveness can be reminding ourselves or even highlighting to ourselves the way that we contribute positively to the world. So I mean, this goes against some of our desire to punish and to see people as black and white, either good or bad, which is affecting our whole country's tribal political way now, that people from one side don't even want to associate with people from the other side. And they think that people on one side are better than they are and people on the other side are worse than they are. But, I've told people who have done harm, that, who have been, let's say, harsh and even abusive to their children, that doesn't fully define you. You're not just that. That needs to be dealt with. But we're not just that. We're much bigger than just one thing or two things. And self-forgiveness involves coming to those difficult understandings that were complex and imperfect. But sometimes we need to remind ourselves of our good qualities, not just our bad. And the last piece is just a flip of the forgiveness process is moving ahead. You want to have more gratitude for whatever you can have more gratitude for. We're not just constantly in a desperate fight for survival, and our ego doesn't have to just constantly be battling. We can be grateful, and that helps us really fully forgive. So when you're in the supermarket and you remember that there's 800,000 items and all you have to do now is just go on your phone and they'll bring them to your house. Like that should make it a little harder to just sit and ruminate how terrible you made your life. I mean, the opportunities and privilege that we all have are almost shocking. But a supermarket, or I drive by a hospital and just remember, thank God I'm not there now, but I probably will be at some point. It's like, thank you. And if somebody cares for you regularly, thank them. Let me finish my piece with a very simple gratitude meditation, which I may have done for you before, but it's so good that you can't, like doing this twice will not hurt anybody. So I'm going to finish my piece with a gratitude practice. So one more time, please close your eyes. This will be a couple minutes, so this isn't going to be like 40 seconds. Just allow yourself to get comfortable. And allow your breathing to quiet a little. And when you inhale, just expand your abdomen. And when you exhale, contract. And then just ask yourself a simple question. Like in the last 48 hours, like who's been kind to me? Just a very, very, very simple question of who's been kind to me. And like try to slow your life down a little so you can look at, well, where was kindness? Did anybody say anything nice to me? Or did anybody like listen to me complain? Did anybody love me in any way? just um, just slow the thing down and recognize where there might be kindness in your life. And when what I'd like you to do as a last step on this is when you find one that's meaningful, almost from like your own heart, just say thank you. Just say thank you. And feel thank you. And then let that go. Just let that go. After you felt it and the thankfulness, just let it go. And then very gently take a breath and allow your eyes to open. So that's a very simple gratitude practice. There's so many of them. There's so many easy ones. The only advice that I would offer is that when you feel gratitude, just try to bring it in. Um, like try to bring it inside, not just leave it on the surface. And that's what the practice is, of bringing it, bringing it. Anyway, that's probably enough from me. So, um, I I hope you got some understanding a little more about how um, people who have been teaching forgiveness for a long time have tried to deal with it as a complex, difficult, but necessary human skill. And it's not a particularly well-liked human skill, but it's necessary. And at this time in whatever our culture, it seems even more necessary. Um, but I hope I again reminded everybody this is simple, but it's not always easy. And that it requires honesty and practice. Like um, this is not cheap. It's a deep human experience. I'll stay for a couple more minutes if there's a question or two. Where does self-compassion fit in with self-forgiveness? Um, Boy, that's a good question, and I don't know that I have a great answer for that. Compassion is generally defined as a recognition of suffering and a desire to relieve suffering. So if we have compassion for our suffering, that means we're aware of it, we have some tenderness towards it, and that we want to do something to help ourselves, which is different than a full acknowledgement that I did something wrong, and that wrong needs attention. It needs healing. It needs amends making. It needs an I'm sorry, or at least an acknowledgement to myself. So what I would say is self-compassion would probably be a decent prelude to the much deeper and more difficult practice of self-forgiveness. Because self-compassion doesn't require us to fully take accountability for what it is we may have done, but it's recognizing that we're in pain and that we deserve some nurturance and solace for that pain. That would be my best answer that I can give. I've never gotten that question before, and I'm always delighted when somebody comes up with a question that I haven't seen, because I've been doing this a very long time. Okay.
Just on the surface of it, it seems that compassion might be the feeling that comes with some understanding of my motives and or the impact, just some compassion of humility, whereas self-forgiveness would include the decision and the action to sort of rectify it.
I would think so. Yeah. Okay. In cases where we have harmed ourselves, would we just plug in ourselves in place of others' harm? You know, I'm going to say that that's a very simplistic, shallow way of holding our behavior, of saying, I always put myself second. I don't believe that's true. We make choices in relationship. If the choices we constantly make are like what everyone calls putting ourselves second, we're doing that volitionally. So we might owe somebody else an apology for having such a shallow, simplistic, non-egalitarian person that they were in relationship with, that we didn't show up. And I think that shallowness is inherent in that question. It's not just about us. And so if we didn't show up as full people because we had a patterning from childhood, or we made choices every time to take the smallest piece of the pie, say, I'm sure that was accompanied by resentment. I'm sure that if we have a 25-year habit of self-denial, which we may, I'm sure some resentment leaked out and somebody else wondered, like, well, wait a second, why are they doing this? And they don't have to do this, and yet they're not being honest. And they're very limited in their response repertoire. So I'm not getting a full person. So what I would say is the kind of self-absorption that led to the stereotypical behavior is also in the question. And I'd be very, very careful with that. So, yes, you can feel compassion for your limited choices. And you can feel remorse because you limited yourself in relationship, that you chose to do that. and that you can change by being more assertive and probably being more fair and maybe telling people more reliably how you feel. But you probably have some serious amends to make for what it was like to be in relationship with somebody who was limited in that way. That would be my answer to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Playing small like that is probably coming from fear, and it's a safety mechanism.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, and underneath it, it's still all about me.
That's or you can share the fear.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, I didn't have a better way of relating to my own fear.
Mhm.
Yeah, Herb, that's great. Right, the self-absorption. How do I respond if the action requested as amend feels like it'll be harmful to me? Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes people are hostile themselves. And so the amend may be harmful, and then you don't do it. However, you might want to check with a couple of objective folks before you make that determination, because you still may be stuck in some bad thinking. And what feels harmful to you may be exactly what you need. But sometimes people do ask harmful things of us, and the answer is no. Forgiveness does not mean that you need to put yourself in a bad position. You still have to take care of yourself, but I wouldn't rely on just you to make that decision. That would be my answer to you. Ask a couple friends, or ask somebody you don't know at all. Just get some objective reality to come in there.
My only comment is amen.
What is this? I have a quick question since it's taped. Can we watch this? I don't have an answer for that.
It's all recorded. It'll be on YouTube, yes.
Okay. In regards to addiction, what does one do with repetitive relapses? I'm probably not the best person to answer that. I'm not an addiction specialist. I can say, though, that I'd be cautious with the word repetitive relapses. I mean, you relapse. It's like, I know how common relapse is in addiction recovery, and any real addiction recovery includes relapse. Like, it's part of the tableau. It's not.
It can be. It's not necessarily a part of it.
Okay.
It can be. And that was a combination of a sponsor and or an addiction specialist and perhaps even a therapist. I mean, that's a very complicated question that deserves a very deliberate answer. Yeah, but not here. Yeah.
All I know is when I was, studying the stages of change, I mean, the data was most people start dozens of times before they actually succeed.
Mhm.
So that was all. Anyway, I'm not the expert in that. I don't see any more questions. It's just about 1 o'clock. I thank you all for your time, and I hope you learned something from yakking with me. I like coming in to talk because you all have a spiritual underpinning because of the 12 steps. And that's really important to me. I don't think we can do this on our own. That's just a deep understanding of mine. So I thank you, and I imagine I'll see some of you again at some point.
You can count on it if you're willing. Thank you so much, Fred, very much. And
Take care, everybody. All the best.
thank you. So my style is different than Fred's, as you're very aware of at this point. And so if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, we'll have some dialogue about it. And at some point, there'll be no questions, and we'll pray the serenity prayer and go about our day. But I'm going to stay here as long as you have questions and or comments and or experiences that you want to share. raise your hand. And once we've vetted all of the hands raised, I'll suggest that you can unmute and just introduce yourself. I don't look at the chat. So don't, if you're expecting to communicate with me through the chat, you won't. I'm just letting you know that.
A lot of what we talked about today and we've talked about in the past with shame and guilt, it seems to me there's shame and guilt, and then there's a shame that doesn't seem to be answered by the steps we've talked about. And I was trying to think of some way to kind of formulate it to make sense. And that, well, this was going on, I kind of came up with the analogy of diabetes. My ex-wife is type 1 diabetic. And 6 years ago, I was diagnosed as type 2 diabetic. And that is one of the things that really got me going and changing my life, including to stop drinking and to try to find a spiritual path to go on. And the point being is that with type 2 diabetes, I was able to not just mitigate it, but also, in a sense, cure it by a lifestyle change,
Right.
Which included things like Fred was talking about, you ate badly, stop eating badly, go to a gym. You drank, stop drinking. And in the course of doing the steps, I was fortunate in that, number one, when I stopped drinking, I never have had any desire to stop or to drink again. It's been 6 years. I was fortunate in that I found a spiritual director through Mary and Joseph, who I met with once a week and who also was in the program. And we went through the 12 steps together. She was acting as a step guide, not as a sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only did I get the benefit of the 12 step, but I got the benefit of her spiritual direction background. Mm-hmm. So I was able to deal with that. And in dealing with that, I was able to address a lot of the harm and stuff I have done. I was also fortunate, and it was grace, that my amends were to the people who I had hurt were accepted across the board graciously by everybody I talked to. But so that's the type 1 diabetic model. And that helped deal with the guilt of my actions and the shame. But then there's a shame that I still have that is more comparable to what my ex-wife goes through with her type 1 diabetes. It's not mitigated by lifestyle change. It can be addressed to a certain degree. Obviously, she has to watch. There's dietary issues and exercise issues.
Terry, let's not get lost in all the words, because I'm not actually sure what you're talking about when you say the shame that you want to address. What is it that you're talking about?
It seems, well, just it's a deep-seated shame that doesn't seem to be.
But when you say shame, what do you mean by shame?
That I'm a terrible person.
Okay. So the shame, unhealthy shame, is about my very being. So
Exactly.
Tell me what your question is about that, because I'm not getting it.
The question is, and that's why I was using the model, is that how does one deal with that? There's the shame and guilt.
Is that a self-esteem issue then?
Well, I don't even know if it's that, because I mean, in some ways, I think I'm just fabulous, but I still have this shame.
What specifically is the shame?
I'm not even sure I can articulate it.
Well, but that's why I'm having a difficulty understanding what the point is you're trying to make, because I actually don't understand what the shame is that you're trying to identify.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe it was funny. Somebody else asked me that once, and the only way I could answer it was comparable to the shame that Adam and Eve felt when they realized they were naked and God was looking for them. And
tell me about Terry. I don't want metaphors and analogies. I want to have Terry tell me what his feeling is that he's calling shame. Is it about your feeling or your wife's feeling?
No. That's why I was saying I was graced that people did seem to accept my amends and forgive me for my actions.
Okay, so what is your feeling of shame then?
That I'm a terrible person. And if you're asking me to explain that, I don't know how to explain that.
Well, again, that sounds like then core self-esteem issue. The shame
That
is
would,
I'm not good enough. I'm actually, there's something inherently flawed with me.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. That's a self-esteem issue. I would recommend you read Nathaniel Branden's 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really good. In fact, Dr. Berger has a emotional sobriety workshop that we're doing on Thursday night. I think it's at 7:00, where we're looking at the steps and self-esteem as articulated in that book. And it's complex. I mean, in the sense of your sense of low self-esteem or whatever it is. But there's a solution to it. I don't want to be glib, but one of the solutions I've heard that is so simple is if you want self-esteem, that is a positive self-esteem, do esteemable actions, which is what in fact you're doing. And if you finished your amends process, that should have helped rehabilitate that sense of self. And then my own experience is that from my practice of meditation and a consistent daily practice, and then a consistent action, taking action, helping other people, I began to have a repaired sense of self that over time became, yeah, I'm a pretty decent guy, which is what I always wanted to be, but never either was or couldn't think that I was. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a process. You have wonderful, it's 6 years, wonderful that you've had a spiritual director, wonderful that you've done the steps. I might challenge you to be connected to, if you're not connected to, an active 12-step program and an active 12-step sponsor. Because a spiritual director who's not in the program is not experienced enough to really help you.
Well, that's what I was saying. I was lucky to find one who is in the program.
Good, yeah.
And even had started her own meeting down at the church that she belongs to.
Wonderful. As long as it's not merging the 12-step process with the church orthodoxy, because that doesn't work from my standpoint. Yeah.
Thank you, Herb.
Thanks very much, Terry.
My question had to do with when somebody has passed and you feel like there's no longer an opportunity to make a difference in repairing the harm you caused in their life.
That's not true.
Thank you.
Well, because in fact, when Fred mentioned it, and he mentioned it in his own way, but I'll say it's a very creative spiritual process to make amends. And he mentioned something about helping children or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
And I made amends to my dead father at a cemetery. He wasn't buried there, but it was a symbol of my amends to my dead father. And that took care of it from the sense of I forgave him and I felt forgiven. But then in light of what Fred had talked about, I made amends to women, the generic concept women, for the mischief of the past, by becoming an active member of a fundraiser activity for the House of Hope, which is a women's recovery home. And so we need to be creative about a substitute amend where, of course, you can't change the past and you can't make a direct amend to somebody who's dead, but you can do it indirectly through a spiritual practice or indirectly through a creative contribution, either money or time, in some related situation.
And then get to the point that you can let yourself off the hook. I think
Well,
for me, that's what
Yeah,
I'm looking for.
exactly. Well, you only get off the hook when you take action.
Yes.
Yeah. No, great question. Hopefully
Thank
the answer was helpful to you and other people. Yeah.
Appreciate it, Herb. Thank you.
I'm trying to be concise because I'm all over the place and I've written a page. I'm trying to get to the kernel of what I want to
Just
say.
be very clear on what your question is.
Okay. And my question is, it's not a question. I just want to make,
Oh, good.
think-
Okay.
and that I'm just realizing, that I went through the process last year of realizing I'm a victim, went through the process this year of sort of realizing my continuation of those behaviors and trying to be very aware of them.
Mhm.
And I am suffering, is what I'm trying to say. And when you're saying forgiveness is a process,
Yeah.
I'm in this process, and it's
Yeah.
in a way, this self-compassion has really, really helped me.
Oh, good.
Being compassionate has allowed me
Yeah.
to look at, oh God, I've done it again. I dismissed myself or blah, blah, blah. And this was just an eye-opener when he said,
Mhm.
when whoever talked about them, I'm not quite sure how actually phrased it, but it's my choice that I limited my choices. I always felt I had no choices, but I have limited them.
Yeah.
And there is a remorse about that. There is a remorse about all these ways of sort of reacting sort of
Right.
unconsciously all my life.
Right.
So I'm just saying it's a process, and I don't even know, how to go about it, except
Right.
just trying to be aware and trying to sort of say, oh, damn, I interrupted again.
Well, that's interesting, and it's important. As you said, the consciousness is important, the awareness, the actions, all important. Are you in a 12-step program?
Oh yeah, I've been.
No, I never assume. So that's why.
Thank you. I've been in FA long time.
Okay.
18
So
years.
have you done the steps 4 through 9 out of the big book and completed it?
I did your workshop last year. I am in this workshop with you this year, and I'm on 6 and 7. And the week workshop last week just opened me up, because 6 and 7 is, I made a list of my character defects or my imperfections or whatever. But he says I have to deal with the function of them. And then he said step 7, which I never got because I have a God sort of issue, this God I don't understand, and asking for it to be removed. But it's my pivot. I have a change in attitude. And those things just were jewels for me. So no, I am determined to do a step 9 because I am so afraid of being, humiliated. But I know it's just me I have to learn to be humble. And I'm on my way there. But I'm just saying that this is a process, and it's difficult. I mean,
You're in it. You're in it. You're in it, and you're on it. I mean, you're making wonderful progress, 6 and 7. You're consistent. You're asking great questions, but it is a process that doesn't complete, at least my experience, until the completion of step 9.
And that's exactly right. And that's why I'm so glad that you take people with these breaks and relapses in my program, FA. I've been in 18 and a half years, but you always had to leave if you made a break. And so I never quite got it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the openness, and I am abstinent and doing well and all that. But
There you go.
it's the inside that
Yeah.
I really need work. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, you're. I'm excited for what you're going to experience. The freedom when you get to the other side of the 9th step.
Yes. I pray for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
And you work for it. Praying's good. Your action is really the more critical part.
I
Thank you
appreciate
so
that.
much. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your inviting Fred Luskin to come on board. That was really insightful. And I loved the caveat that he put in there of the act of forgiveness requires action, not only in asking for forgiveness, but changing our direction. And I'm right there with Rita, because I've been in FA for 21 years and have about 4 months of abstinence because I consistently take the wrong action. And it doesn't matter how to qualify that action, but I have breaks. And And I'm really flummoxed that I'm disappointed that my breaking, even though it's small and it's never a big deal, it's not a big amount of food, it puts the bars in front of me again. I'm right back there in the prison of my own remorse, my own guilt, my own shame, and my.
So did you hear his part about accepting your humanity?
Exactly. I did. I did that. And I know that you think that I'm a perfectionist. And
Oh, no, there's no question in my mind.
okay, there we go. All right, now.
No, you've brought me to the full, complete without qualification.
All right, so I'm a perfectionist with a bad habit.
Unhealthy. Don't use the term bad. I have an unhealthy habit, which I'm in the process of identifying and changing.
But does it have to take 22 years?
Well, but have you done the work that you now are doing for the last 20 years?
No, I have not. I have
Right,
not. Because
right. So it's going to take what it takes, but it's going to take proper information and healthy actions. And that's the combination that so many people miss in the 12 steps room. They're not getting healthy information about actual application of the instructions, nor are they getting anybody telling them and sharing with them actual experience that they've had, because they haven't had it. They have a lot of rules and a lot of control, but very little experience of real freedom.
All right, so I can have hope in my heart and my mind.
And you do.
I do. I am feeling discouraged, and I am feeling distracted by the amount of work that it's taking me to get to this place. But my feet are moving and I am showing up.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that. But I'm very, as Rita said, I'm very uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. But I know.
And what step are you in?
I am working still on step 4 by column 3 and column 4. And then I'm doing 5, 6, and 7. I'm right there.
If you weren't uncomfortable in column 3 and 4, you're not doing it correctly.
Yeah, well, okay. I'm doing it perfectly.
Got to slip it in. Perfectly imperfect.
Uncomfortable.
No.
Okay. Thank you. I so appreciate you. Thank you. And I appreciate everybody being on here. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. There are times that you will be comfortable cyclically in the process. There will be times when you're very uncomfortable cyclically in the process. But on the other side of 9, you will be more consistently comfortable than you've ever been in your entire life.
Well, I love the analogy of cleaning out the pipes, and my pipes are pretty
Exactly.
cluttered. They're cluttered, just I guess like everybody else's.
That's correct. Right. Yeah. This is the major roto-rooter, and then 10, 11, and 12 continues to keep the channel clear.
Right.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Thanks, Judy, very much. So I don't see any hands up on the screen, and you're welcome now if you have a question, a comment, resistance, an experience, especially an experience that you would like to share. Otherwise, we will end it in a couple, 3 minutes, or go longer if in fact we have dialogue. I don't want to prolong it, but I don't want to shut it down and leave anybody frustrated because they didn't ask what they really wanted to ask or share what they really wanted to share. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed Fred Luskin. You've heard me before. If you've heard me before, I hope it was helpful this time to hear it again or to hear a different aspect of it. I'm going to invite you now to join me in the Serenity Prayer. It's really the rock solid tool of what we're talking about here, not only forgiveness, but emotional sobriety, the recognition of reality as it is, the recognition that I don't control. Please hear this. I do not control anything outside of me or inside of me. I don't control it, but I have influence. That's the word I really love and embrace. I have influence outside, I have influence inside, and I have responsibility to distinguish and to take actions that are appropriate and healthy, and then to acknowledge that I make mistakes and do course correction. And I learn and I learn and I learn. I make less mistakes, less gross mistakes. I correct them more quickly and more effectively. And it's a process, perfectly imperfect. All right, please join me in that serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.